Sometimes the loudest injustice isn't a slur or a scandal, it's a spreadsheet, a funding gap, a quiet denial, a closed door that no one admits they closed. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't storm out or slam her hand on the table. But something in her presence measured, steady, almost unbearably still made the air in that studio shift. Because she'd sat in those underfunded classrooms. She'd watched dreams deferred, not by lack of talent, but by the weight of where someone was born. And across from her sat a man who believed that all doors were open, simply because he had never been locked out. This isn't a story about rage. It's a story about restraint, about how dignity survives in broken systems, and how one sentence, said calmly enough, can bring a nation to silence. So what happens when the person who was never meant to speak up finally does? It started, as it often does, with a smile that meant nothing. Kevin O'Leary sat across from Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett under the clinical lights of Focus Line tonight, legs loosely crossed, holding a silver pen like it was a scalpel. The show was just starting, but Kevin already looked bored, as if this would be another one of those polite sparring matches cable news viewers could half-watch between phone scrolls and reheated leftovers. The red tally light blinked on. Marcus Reed, the host, turned to the camera with the ease of a man used to controlling the temperature of a room. Tonight, we're diving into America's education landscape, what's fair, what's failing, and who's truly being left behind. Joining us, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas, and entrepreneur and investor Kevin O'Leary. Jasmine offered a soft, measured, "Thank you." Kevin gave a nod, already grinning. Marcus didn't waste time. Data shows that standardized test scores are recovering post-pandemic, but stark disparities remain, especially across low-income and majority Black school districts. Critics say this points to systemic inequality. Others argue the solution lies in school choice and parental responsibility. Kevin, what's your take? Kevin leaned back just slightly, like he was about to explain algebra to someone who'd never seen a calculator. "I think we've got to stop treating every disparity as injustice," he said. "Education is about initiative. Parents who care find better schools. Students who want more work harder to get it. That's just reality. The market doesn't care where you live. You want better education? Move to where it's better." It was said with easy, so clean, so confident, so unbothered. There was a beat of silence, then another. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She just breathed. Kevin took that pause as confirmation and went on. "I mean, let's be honest. We've built this victimhood narrative that says every underperforming school is someone else's fault. Maybe instead of demanding more federal dollars, we teach resilience." He smiled again. Resilience. Jasmine's jaw didn't clench, but something behind her eyes shifted barely, but enough. Not from offense, from memory. Because Jasmine had walked through schools in Oak Cliff where teachers shared textbooks between classes, where cafeterias didn't serve hot food every day, where parents worked 3 jobs and still got labeled uninvolved. She had sat on folding chairs at community forums where mothers cried not for themselves, but for their sons who read at a 4th grade level in the 8th grade because their school had lost its reading specialist. Not once, twice. She remembered one principal telling her quietly, "We haven't updated our science lab since Bush's 2nd term. I teach chemistry with plastic cups and a slideshow." But she didn't say any of that. Not yet. Because Kevin wasn't finished. "You know what I've seen?" he asked, looking toward Marcus. "The most driven kids, Black, white, Latino, doesn't matter, they find a way. You can't teach hunger. Some kids have it, and some kids wait for handouts." The word hung there. Handouts. Jasmine turned toward him, not sharply, just enough to face him fully. "Do you know what hunger looks like, Kevin?" she asked, voice calm, almost gentle. Kevin didn't answer, so she did. "It's a 10-year-old skipping breakfast and still showing up to class. It's a school counselor trying to keep a child from aging out of literacy. It's a student walking 45 minutes to get to a magnet school because his zip code isn't zoned for hope. Still, her tone was measured. But Marcus leaned forward, sensing something rising beneath the surface. "Congresswoman," he said, "some would argue school choice gives families the power to escape underperforming districts. Isn't that a better solution than waiting on reform?" That wordscape landed differently. Jasmine tilted her head. "Escape sounds easy until you realize who's locked in." Kevin chuckled. "Look, school choice is freedom. If a parent doesn't like their district, move. Pick a better one. That's how competition works." And there it was. The invisible push. Not a slur, not an insult, just a tidy dismissal wrapped in policy language. Just move. Just try harder. Just don't be poor where you were born. Jasmine sat still, but inside her, something deeper than anger stirred. It wasn't that Kevin was cruel. It was that he was comfortable. Comfortable enough to call inequality a parenting issue. Comfortable enough to forget that not everyone starts at the same gate. Comfortable enough to believe his view from the mountaintop was the full landscape. And Jasmine had seen that mountaintop too from the parking lot, through a chain-link fence, standing next to students who were just as brilliant, but whose classrooms reeked of mildew and whose AP classes had been canceled because there weren't enough teachers certified to teach them. And now she was sitting across from someone who didn't just dismiss their experience, he denied it existed. That was the push. Not loud, not overt, not headline-worthy, but deep. And Jasmine Crockett, Congresswoman, former public defender, daughter of Texas, would not raise her voice. Not yet. She didn't need to. Because what came next wasn't fury. It was precision. And the room, like the country, had no idea what was about to unfold. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She adjusted her mic pack gently, the same way she'd once adjusted the cuffs of her clients in court calmly, with care, and without giving anything away. Kevin was still talking, not loudly, not cruelly, just confidently, as if he'd been knighted by data and absolved by affluence. He gestured toward some printed figures on the desk. "If we're talking about federal dollars for public education, let's talk results. You can throw $1 million into a failing district and it won't change a thing if there's no accountability. Some kids just don't want it." He smiled. That same smile. Jasmine nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in understanding. Because she knew what wasn't being said. What Kevin really meant was, some kids aren't worth the investment. And the room wasn't ready for the weight of that truth. Marcus glanced toward Jasmine, his host instinct sensing the unease, maybe hoping she'd jump in, counter, match fire with fire. But Jasmine just offered a polite, practiced smile. The kind of smile women like her had worn for generations. The kind that survives panels, boardrooms, and policy tables. The kind you put on when you know if you show too much rage, grief, pain, you'll be dismissed as emotional before your second sentence lands. And behind that smile, Jasmine carried weight. She carried the voice of Ms. Delors from District 17, who taught third grade in a classroom with cracked windows, whose students rotated chairs because there weren't enough. Dolores, who once bought pencils and sanitary pads from her own paycheck, and who cried in the parking lot the day they cut her reading program. She carried Malik's story, a junior from South Dallas who won the regional science fair using broken lab equipment, only to be told by a judge that his project was surprisingly articulate. She carried the message from a mother who had slipped her a note at a grocery store. "Thank you for fighting for schools like mine. We don't want special treatment. We just want the mold out of our gym ceiling before winter comes." But Kevin didn't know those stories. To him, the failure was individual, not systemic, not historical, not geographic. He continued, "We act like the government is supposed to solve every problem. But what happened to personal agency? What happened to doing the work?" Jasmine shifted slightly in her seat. Not fidgeting, just anchoring herself. Because she'd heard it all before. That tone, that logic, That assumption that children were underperforming not because they lacked resources, but because they lacked will. Kevin looked to her now. You're in Congress, Jasmine. You've seen the numbers. Billions spent. And yet here we are. Doesn't that prove the money isn't the issue? Jasmine let the question hang. Not because she didn't have an answer, she had hundreds, but because she was measuring something else, the gap between data and dignity. I've seen the numbers, she said finally, but I've also seen the context behind them. Kevin raised an eyebrow, a silent go-on. Jasmine did. I've seen schools with no internet in the library, classrooms without functioning heat in December, gym teachers covering algebra because the math department was down to one. I've walked through those hallways. Not as a politician, as a neighbor, a woman, a black girl who grew up watching her classmates fall behind, not because they lacked brains, but because they lacked bandwidth. Literally. Marcus leaned back slightly, letting her take the space. But Jasmine wasn't giving a speech. She was reciting facts that lived in her bones. You see numbers. I see names. You see a budget line. I see a school nurse treating asthma with cough drops because the inhalers ran out. Kevin tried to reinsert himself. But those are anecdotal. You can't shape national policy on emotion. And there it was again. Emotion. The invisible disqualifier. The coded language that said, be quiet unless you can be cold. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't fire back. She simply let the silence breathe. Then, calmly, I'm not shaping policy on emotion. I'm shaping it on memory. And memory doesn't lie. The control room behind the glass wall didn't move, because the air in the studio was changing. Even Marcus seemed to recognize it. Congresswoman, could you give an example of how this disparity plays out, say, in your own district? Jasmine nodded once. There's a high school in Oak Cliff, 5 miles from my home. The robotics team there meets in a converted storage room. Their competition travel budget last year was funded by bake sales and GoFundMes. 2 districts over, at a school with a newer building and a wider zip code, their robotics team got 75-0 in sponsorships and flew to nationals in Denver. Same age, same goals, different access. That's not a gap. That's a wall. Kevin smirked, but didn't interrupt this time, because it was getting harder to. The tone wasn't adversarial. It was observational, unapologetic. And Marcus, for once, didn't jump to another talking point. He let it linger. It was subtle, but real of the shift. Not just in the conversation, but in the room. Behind Jasmine's soft tone was a relentless truth. Behind her smile was not resignation, but resilience. And in her eyes, for those who looked closely, was the weight of every child who had ever been told, "You're behind," without being told why. This wasn't about federal funding anymore. It was about moral funding, the kind of investment that asked not, "How much can we spare?" but rather, "What do we owe?" And Jasmine Crockett had decided she would ask that question aloud, even if no one else wanted to hear the answer. The thing about television is it forgets fast. Viewers blink, hosts pivot, and guests smooth out their edges in time for the next segment. But something in the studio tonight wasn't smoothing over. It was 8:23 p.m. when Kevin leaned forward again, rested his forearms on the desk, and smiled that same knowing smile. "I'm not saying we don't have challenges," he said, voice low, "but we've got to stop blaming geography for outcomes. People move. They adapt. They compete. That's what built this country. If your school isn't working for your kid, you don't wait for Congress, you move them." He looked directly at Jasmine. That's called choice. It sounded so simple, so clean, like a prescription for success written by someone who'd never had to swallow the medicine. Jasmine didn't blink. Marcus nodded like he'd heard that argument 1,000 times before, and maybe he had. "Congresswoman?" he prompted gently. "Thoughts on school choice?" Jasmine let a beat pass, not for effect but to swallow a memory. Then she turned, not to Marcus, not even to Kevin, but to the camera. "I know a woman in my district," she began. single mom, works nights at the post office. Her son, Jameer, is brilliant engineering, minded, quiet, patient with broken things. She tried to enroll him in a magnet program 2 districts away, filled out every form, met every deadline. But because she used her sister's address on the application, she was charged with fraud. The studio held its breath. She was trying to give her son a future, Jasmine continued, and the system treated her like a criminal for it. Kevin shifted in his seat. She didn't get probation. She got a record. Her son, who had a 4 GPA, was expelled from the receiving school and had to repeat a semester in a school where his science teacher also doubled as a substitute gym coach. Marcus looked stunned. Kevin tried to interject. "That's an extreme example," he offered. "That's not how school choice is supposed to work." Jasmine turned to him now. "But that's how it does work. On the ground. In real life. Not in your spreadsheets. In people's lives." Her tone was still soft, but her posture had changed. No longer just participating, now asserting. And for the first time, Kevin looked unsure. "I support options," he said, "but we can't conflate individual stories with structural truth." Jasmine nodded. "Then let's talk structural truth." She pulled a printed chart from under the desk. The crew, sensing what was coming, framed her tighter in the shot. "This is a breakdown of per-pupil spending in 2 school zones in my district, one in a neighboring, wealthier zip code. The first receives $8,756 per student annually. The second receives $17,894. She laid the sheet flat. Same state, same education board, same country. That difference isn't about effort. It's about policy. It's about design. Kevin looked toward Marcus. "I'm just saying." Jasmine cut in, still quiet, but immovable now. "You're saying the system's fair. I'm saying the system is efficient at keeping certain kids exactly where it wants them." Marcus tried to pivot. "Let's discuss potential reforms," he said, adjusting his cue cards. "Are there policies you're working on now that address these funding gaps?" But no one was listening to him. Not Kevin. Not the studio crew. And definitely not the millions watching at home. Because Jasmine wasn't finished. She turned back to Kevin. "I want to tell you something. You said earlier that parents who care find better schools." He nodded, unsure now whether to agree or brace himself. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice still even. "Let me tell you what caring looks like in my district. It looks like moms setting 4 a.m. alarms to drive their kids across town before their own shifts start. It looks like students borrowing Wi-Fi from gas stations to submit homework. It looks like teachers who stay after hours unpaid to prep kids for AP exams they didn't have textbooks for." She let the words breathe. "So, when you say just move, what you're really saying is just escape. But you can't escape something that's everywhere." Kevin tried to respond. "I respect that. But we also have to be realistic." Jasmine cut in again, not harshly, just precisely. "What's not realistic is expecting equity to come from zip code roulette." Her words landed like a door click in a quiet house. You didn't realize it had shut until it echoed. Marcus blinked. Behind the camera, a production assistant mouthed, "Whoa!" And Kevin finally stopped smiling. Because this wasn't an exchange anymore. This was a mirror. And for the first time, he had to look in it. By the time the segment hit the 30-minute mark, Marcus had all but given up trying to control the pacing. He knew what this was now. Not a debate, not a back and forth. This was something older, heavier. A reckoning disguised as conversation. Kevin O'Leary leaned back in his seat again, fingers pressed together like a steeple. His tone changed, less jovial, more clipped. "All I'm saying," he began carefully now, "is that we need to be careful not to coddle underperformance. I've invested in companies started by immigrants, single mothers, people who had nothing. You want success? You build. You don't wait." Jasmine didn't move. "You think I don't believe in effort?" she asked. Kevin smiled faintly, assuming this was where she'd soften. I think you believe in people, he offered. But sometimes believing too much means making excuses for them. Jasmine turned toward him now, fully. There's a young man named Aiden, she began. He's 17, lives in Pleasant Grove, loves math, wants to be an engineer, walks to school every day 45 minutes. Not because he loves cardio, because the district canceled his bus route due to budget optimization. Marcus sat forward slowly. Last year, Jasmine continued, Aiden built a bridge model from recycled materials in his spare time, entered it in the state STEM challenge, took second place. He didn't get first, not because his design was worse, but because he didn't have access to the same simulation software as the kids from the suburban district. One of the judges told him so. She looked at Kevin. That's not a lack of work ethic, that's a lack of access. Kevin started to reply, but she kept going. Aiden applied for a summer academy hosted by a tech company in Austin. He met the academic threshold, wrote the essay, but was denied. The reason? He didn't have a letter of recommendation from a certified AP physics teacher. His school doesn't have one. She stopped. Just for a second. I don't want you to admire Aiden. I want you to understand that he's not exceptional. He's common. His story is repeated in neighborhoods all across this country. Places where potential walks miles, just to sit in a classroom built to lower expectations. Kevin opened his mouth, closed it, then said, That's tragic. But again, we can't legislate every edge case. Edge case. Jasmine tilted her head. You think being poor in a forgotten school district is an edge case? I'm saying if you wait for the system to save you, you'll be waiting forever. And what do you call a system that waits on no one but rewards only those already ahead? She leaned forward, hands calmly folded. Isn't that just a race with no finish line? With hurdles only placed on some lanes? Kevin sighed, his frustration finally showing. We can't keep circling the same narrative. The numbers don't lie. Jasmine's voice dropped, low but unwavering. No, but people use them to lie all the time. She reached for another page. This is a spreadsheet from the Department of Education approval rates for infrastructure funding across the last 4 cycles. Districts with predominantly white student bodies received funding at nearly twice the rate of majority black districts, even when their applications were ranked equally in need. Marcus glanced at the data. Kevin stared at it. I didn't make these numbers up, Jasmine said. They're federal, they're audited, and they're old enough to have made change by now, but they haven't. Why? Silence. Then Jasmine spoke again, slower this time. Because we don't fund dreams. We fund zip codes. She let that sit. Not like a headline, like a sentence. Kevin recovered. Or tried to. I still believe students can rise above, he said. Jasmine smiled softly, not kindly. You ever try rising in a room with no windows? Marcus almost whispered, What do you mean? I mean, schools with no AC in the summer, no heating in the winter. I mean no arts, no music, no second language support. I mean a freshman class where every student shares a Chromebook and half the bathrooms are closed for plumbing. She looked directly into the camera now. I've seen 5th graders solving algebra problems on a cracked phone screen because their school didn't have working laptops. And we tell them, just work harder. Kevin sat straighter. You're painting this as systemic cruelty. I see inefficiency. That's because your view comes from the top floor. Kevin tried to push back. But if we highlight only what's broken, we fix nothing. Jasmine finished for him. I know. And then she paused. Long enough for the silence to shift from discomfort to reflection. Here's the part that's hardest to say, she said quietly. We don't just deprive students of resources, we deprive them of belief. We give them metal detectors, but not microscopes. We give them uniforms, but not electives. And we call that equality. No one spoke. Not Marcus. Not Kevin. Not the control room. You call it accountability, Jasmine said, but the only people held accountable in these schools are the students, never the system. Kevin's voice came back muted now. Are you saying we shouldn't expect excellence? I'm saying you shouldn't expect it without investment. And then she said one last thing, not loudly, but it cleaved the moment in half. Don't confuse underfunded with underachieving. The sentence didn't shout. It didn't demand. It simply existed. Complete, final, unapologetically true. Marcus sat still, hands folded. Kevin lowered his eyes. Jasmine turned away from the camera. Not because she was finished, but because the point had landed. Hard. Not like a knockout. Like a mirror that couldn't be turned around. And behind the glass, the control room director said quietly to no one in particular. She didn't even raise her voice. The segment ended without a button. No cheery goodbye. No panel-wide smiles. Just a long shot of the studio desk, and a silence so thick you could hear the buzz of the overhead lights. Marcus muttered a "thank you to our guests," barely audible, and then the screen faded to black. Behind the glass, a junior producer whispered, "We're clear," but no one moved. Jasmine Crockett removed her mic without a word. She didn't look at Kevin. She didn't have to. The room already knew what had happened. This wasn't a takedown. This wasn't a moment of public humiliation. This was something quieter, deeper. Kevin O'Leary stayed seated, blinking slowly, as if trying to replay the last 40 minutes and find the part where he lost control. He wouldn't find it, because Jasmine had never taken it from him. She had simply filled the space he assumed would be empty. Outside the studio, the night air was still. Jasmine stepped into it like someone who had exhaled something held too long in her lungs. In the town car waiting to take her back to the hotel, her chief of staff, Brenna, was already fielding calls. "They're clipping it," she said, not even turning around. "It's everywhere." Jasmine leaned her head back against the seat. "They always clip it," she replied. "But do they hear it?" Brenna showed her the first viral post, a 42-second snippet where Jasmine had said, "Don't confuse underfunded with underachieving." It already had 140, 0 likes and 12, 0 shares. In just under an hour. Another clip, even shorter, simply showed Jasmine looking into the camera and saying, "We fund zip codes, not dreams." A caption read, "She didn't flinch. He didn't know what to say." By 11 p.m., Crockett Truth was trending in 7 states. By 1 a.m., it had hit the global list. And still, Jasmine said nothing. No tweet. No press statement. No media follow-up. Not yet. Because she knew silence had its own gravity now. By morning, inboxes across the Hill were flooded. Not with outrage. With recognition. With echoes. A retired school counselor in Akron emailed Jasmine's office. "I used to keep boxes of pencils in my car, just in case. They said we didn't budget well, but we were never given enough to begin with." A principal in Tallahassee wrote, "You gave voice to what I've wanted to say in every school board meeting, but knew I'd lose funding if I did." A high school senior from Detroit DM'd her campaign account. "My school library hasn't bought new books since 2012. I thought we were just unlucky. I didn't know it was political." But one message stopped Jasmine. It came from a name she hadn't seen in years. Mrs. Tillman, her 5th-grade teacher. It was simple. "I remember your quiet. Now I understand it was never silence. I'm proud of your voice." Jasmine read it 3 times before folding her phone shut. Not for effect. For memory. Meanwhile, conservative media scrambled. One outlet called her divisive. Another called her comments emotionally driven, lacking economic rigor. But the problem was, she hadn't shouted. She hadn't interrupted. She hadn't even rolled her eyes. She had stayed precise, calm, measured. And people saw that. Even people who didn't want to. On Good Morning Phoenix, a retired GOP strategist reluctantly admitted, "I didn't agree with her politics, but I'll tell you she came in prepared, and that man had no business brushing off public education like it's a lifestyle choice. She cleaned him up, period." Across platforms, the same theme repeated. She didn't debate, she revealed. At Beanrise Cafe, back in Oak Cliff, The morning after was strange. Trina Merriweather stood behind the counter, pouring coffee for a woman in scrubs, when her phone buzzed so much she thought it was overheating. The woman smiled. "She mentioned you." Trina blinked. "What?" The woman turned her phone to show a clip Jasmine saying, "I've visited schools 5 minutes from where we sit now. Places like Trina's Cafe help students feel seen because their own schools forgot how to." Trina nearly dropped the coffee pot. People started coming in just to sit, not to buy, just to be there. A man in coveralls brought a binder full of denial letters for his daughter's scholarship. A teenage girl asked if she could charge her school laptop. And Trina just kept pouring coffee. Elsewhere, the ripples spread. In a barber shop in Newark, a father pulled up the clip between cuts. "You see that? She ain't yell. She ain't threaten. She just told the truth." In a classroom in Chicago, a civics teacher played the segment for her juniors. "Pay attention to structure," she said. She used data. She used empathy. She asked a question the other side couldn't answer. That's how you change a room without shouting. On TikTok, teens stitched clips of Jasmine's calm rebuttals with footage of their own broken textbooks, their gym floors warped from water damage, their college rejection letters that cited course rigor. And in the quiet corners of living rooms, on lunch breaks in warehouses, in empty teachers' lounges after hours, people said aloud what they'd kept private. "She just said what we've all known." 3 days later, Kevin O'Leary released a video. It was shot vertically, dim lighting, in his kitchen. "I stand by what I said," he began. "I believe in merit. I believe in drive. But I also believe in respectful dialogue. And I thank Congresswoman Crockett for hers." The top comment under the video read, "She brought receipts. You brought privilege." Another, "She didn't embarrass you. You did that yourself." Back in her district office, Jasmine reviewed a new draft of legislation with Brenna. It was called the Transparency in Public School Funding Act. It didn't promise miracles. It didn't overhaul systems. It simply required one thing: that every public school district publish annual reports detailing how funds were allocated by student, by program, by zip code. Brenna looked up. "You know it's going to die in committee." Jasmine nodded. "Let it die loud." That night, she sat alone in her apartment, the lights dimmed, her inbox blinking. Instead of answering, she opened a blank document and wrote, "Dear student, you don't know me personally, but I know you. I've walked your hallways, sat in your cracked desks, waited in your underfunded lunch lines, heard your teachers apologize for broken printers. I didn't speak out because I wanted attention. I spoke out because I was tired of hearing people say, 'Just work harder,' as if effort erases inequality. You're not underachieving, you're underserved. You're not a statistic. You're a survivor of policy decisions made without your name in the room. They will say you are angry, that you are lazy, that you are asking for too much. Don't believe them. They're just not used to you asking at all. Keep your notes, keep your questions, keep your truth. Because when they say you're emotional, what they really mean is they heard you. Stay loud, even in silence." JC. She hit send. No press release, no interview, just a whisper into inboxes around the country. But it echoed. Teachers printed it and taped it to whiteboards. Principals read it over intercoms. A librarian in Baton Rouge translated it into Spanish for ESL students. A mother in Fresno framed it in her daughter's bedroom. And a boy named Aiden, yes, the same Aiden, read it aloud during morning announcements at his school. For once, no one interrupted him. 1 week later, Jasmine Crockett stood at the steps of a middle school in South Dallas, not to give a speech, just to visit. Inside, a student pastor in the hallway, backpack hanging from one strap. "You that lady from TV?" he asked. She smiled. "Sometimes." He grinned. "You talk like you know my school." Jasmine crouched just slightly, looking him in the eye. "I do. And I know you don't need anyone's permission to dream bigger." The boy nodded. Like maybe, just maybe, he believed her. And somewhere, in offices with locked doors and thick carpets, policymakers scrolled through headlines they didn't want to read. Crockett's words still reverberate. A debate or a mirror? They closed tabs. They muttered. They moved on. But the echo stayed. Because what Jasmine Crockett had done wasn't a performance. It was a punctuation. A line drawn not for applause, but for memory. And memory, true memory, refuses to be quiet. Have you ever been told to just try harder, in a place that was never built for you to begin with? Have you ever watched someone dismiss your struggle, not with cruelty, but with comfort because they've never had to carry what you carry? This story isn't just about Jasmine Crockett. It's about the classrooms we forgot, the students we underestimated, and the truths we kept quiet because no one asked. But what if we didn't stay quiet? What if your story, your questions, your voice, was the beginning of someone else's clarity? If you've ever been made to feel small in a room that should have lifted you, know this: you are not the exception, you are not invisible, and you are not alone. Resilience doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just sits still, looks someone in the eye, and tells the truth anyway. So if this story stirred something in you, take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment, tell us how this resonates with your journey, and if you haven't already, subscribe. Because these stories, your stories, deserve more than just a moment. They deserve a movement. And remember, we don't fund dreams, we fund zip codes. But maybe, just maybe, we can change that. We'll see you in the next story. Stay tuned.